This Brian McKnight. I'm here with Heather Evans. Heather is a political scientist at UVA Wise, one of my colleagues, and she's been back at Wise, what, 1 year? 1 year
1 year.
now?
Yeah.
She is how many years were you out in Texas?
10.
10, okay. And you were
Yeah.
Sam Houston State?
Yep.
Okay. So she was at Sam Houston State for 10 years, but she grew up in Council, Virginia, so she speaks the language,
Yep.
or speaks the language occasionally, maybe. Well, one of the many interesting things about Heather is that she lives in Abingdon, and she is leading an effort to have the two Confederate monuments that currently stand on the Washington County Courthouse lawn to be moved over to, I think, Sinking Spring Cemetery.
That's the suggestion. There's other suggestions as well, but that one seems to fit the conversation, given that there is a section of that cemetery dedicated to the unknown Confederate soldiers, and there's a whole section there where the monuments would be able to be relocated to. But there's a couple other suggestions from people in the community as well.
Yeah,
but that's what I'm suggesting to the board.
Well, Sinking Spring is probably the most logical place. It has a pretty deep Civil War history. John Hunt Morgan was buried there for a while until his wife realized that he was much too important to be buried in Abingdon, and then she moved him twice, actually. And then you have the grave of John Floyd, who was former governor of Virginia, former Secretary of War, and one of the absolute worst Confederate generals in history. Although he was so bad, he turned out to be a pretty good Union general, even though he wasn't even in the Union. So it is a bastion of Civil War history in our own peculiar little way, I think. Well, Heather, tell me how you got started on this.
Yeah, so this is an interesting story in that, as you mentioned, I grew up in Council, and as a small child, even in high school, I mean, we would come to Abingdon often. We would drive through town, but a lot of times when we drove through town, we would drive through and then kind of end up in other sections of the town other than near the courthouse. And so as a child, I don't remember seeing those monuments because I don't remember spending time at the courthouse. But when I moved back to town, that's actually the first thing that we noticed. My husband is he's actually from Detroit. And so that's where he grew up. And so we're driving through town, bringing our things into a rental home. And we passed by the courthouse, and he was like, wait, what? Like, you have a Confederate monument outside your courthouse? So, after we got settled and we ended up buying a home here in Abingdon, I started doing some research on the monument. And then given the movement in the country, and if you're turning on your news right now, that's what you're hearing about and reading about and talking about. It felt like the right time to be having this conversation. The law in Virginia also recently changed so that now communities can have these conversations because they weren't able to have those conversations. So starting July 1st, communities can decide whether they want to remove, relocate, contextualize any of their monuments that exist in their purview. So I began this petition. It was back at the beginning of June. And I kind of sat around, I was doing some internet research. I was trying to figure out, surely there's been a group here that has taken this on or has brought this up before, because for me and my husband just to drive through town and for him to have that reaction, like, wait, what? Like, outside your courthouse, like right there, you have to pass it to enter the courthouse. That doesn't seem like the best place for it.
Actually, for the people who put it up, it was the perfect place for it.
Well, that's true. Technically, that's not the first place it was. It actually was in the middle of the street, like near the courthouse, but not courthouse grounds. Right there next to the courthouse, where there's like kind of an open area that used to stand in the middle of the street. And from what I've been reading historically about this, people kept hitting it with their cars. And so at some point in the 30s, because people just drive into it and they were tired of that, they moved it to where it currently is. So it's been moved.
It's been moved once. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. But I kept thinking, like, there must be, there has to be other people. There has to be a group. There has to be whatever. I did find one newspaper article from a while back where there was somebody who came to town who was really interested in the monuments, and they had conversations with the historical society and so forth. And I did find that there was some communication that had happened before between different people, thinking that, like, this is something that we should consider. But because of the law, like, no one's been able to do anything. And now, you know, the petition, I was like, well, fine. Like, somebody has to do this. Somebody has to, you know, essentially light the fuse. So I'll put out the petition and we'll see if there is support. Because it could be that it falls flat. Like, if I put it out there and this is a town that has deep, rich history in the Confederacy, if a lot of people don't sign, then that also says, well, the community itself is not ready to have this conversation, right? We need to have it, but there's going to be a lot of pushback. And right now, I think this morning when I checked it, there's over 1,900 names. So I've been checking those as well against, like, property tax records and voter registration. And I'm in the process of trying to somehow line it up with also students who attend Emory, because a lot of those students may not be registered to vote, but may have signed. So I'm just trying to get a handle on how many of the 1,900 are actual citizens of Washington County. And then the conversation tomorrow is with the Board of Supervisors.
For those viewers who are real supporters of Confederate monuments, it's all because she brought her husband from Detroit down here to cause trouble.
That's the Yankee, yes.
Yeah, right there's your thesis statement. No, but I really applaud what you're doing. You know, like you, I grew up in Southwest Virginia, and, you know, you drive past these things and you kind of sort of know they're there, but you don't really give them any thought, because nobody really gives them any thought anymore, except for those people who are affected by them. You know, they kind of hide in plain sight very often.
They do.
And one of the things that, because as a Civil War historian, I get asked these questions an awful lot, and I wish I had more patience, but I don't have a lot of patience. And my answers are sometimes unsatisfying, but I always remind people that when we're talking about things such as you're petitioning for here, you're talking about a monument to an idea, to a principle, to an institution that really viciously excludes a significant portion of your population.
Yeah.
And I always like to ask them if they would feel comfortable if the town of Big Stone Gap put maybe a statue of, you know, maybe Malcolm X right in the median right in front of their house. And they think that's a terrible idea, by the way, but they tend to be okay with Confederate representations. So, you know, that kind of troubles me sometimes. Let's put it that way.
And, you know, the one argument that I hear on chat boards and other places is that these things are history, right? That to even touch them, because essentially what I'm asking is that they be relocated, not be destroyed, but be moved. But even the idea of touching them and placing them somewhere else has a lot of people upset. And that the idea that, you know, this is history, right? That you shouldn't touch it because it's history. And in some communities, they are being destroyed, right? They're just being taken down. They're not being put in museums. They're not being whatever. I hate that is being used in that way, because monuments themselves are not history.
Right.
We learn about history from books, and we do learn about history from museums, but to say that a monument teaches us that is unfortunate. Well,
you know, it can teach history. It just tends to teach bad history, really bad history. If you read some of the more lengthy epitaphs on some of these monuments, you would really wonder what war they're talking about and what cause they're talking about. And that's the reason why these things were embraced so much by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, because they became the premier authors of that Confederate story after the war ended. People, they love to imagine these monuments to be germane to the Civil War. If they're representative of anything, they're representative of that very racialized era from about 1890 to about 1920. They're representative of that push to disfranchise. I hate that when people add the end.
Intimidate.
Disfranchise and marginalize blacks who could theoretically vote prior to that. But yeah, I'm with you. I applaud what you're doing and your approach, and I'm sure you've gotten some kick or some pushback on it. Whoa, what just happened to my computer? Okay, there my computer is. I must have touched something. But tell me, have you gotten a lot of resistance for this?
Oh, yes. Okay, so when I started the petition, at first, on the very first day, all I did was put it on my Facebook page and then Twitter, places that I, go just personally. I think it was the second day I decided to put it up on a public board that's just for Abingdon, and immediately just putting that up there, I received some really interesting comments. Someone said I had a PhD in destroying America.
I have those too.
Who knew? I need to put that as a tagline, like on my syllabus. But so that was fun. That actually, so I put it up there on this public board and said, as you know, there are 2 monuments outside the courthouse. If you agree that these should be moved, the link is here. And I just left it alone. I didn't engage with anyone. And then all of the hate messages start coming in. And a lot of people were telling me I need to move back to council, which, I mean, okay. And then, at some point, I only let it go for 45 minutes. And as the person who created the post, I could go on and shut down those comments. I could kind of mute it and just say, thank you for your comments. And that's what I did. I muted it. And then I said, the petition is above. I'm going to turn off the comments because it's getting into this sort of bullying territory. And I don't think anyone wants to go into that territory. Let's just talk about the issue. And then, but then an administrator of that page turned those comments back on. And I was thinking to myself, you're going to sit there and monitor this because this is getting out of hand. And about an hour later, he deleted the whole thing. And so this was on the second day this petition even existed. And at that point, there might have been 100 signatures. So then when it got to be around 1,000 people had signed, I got, WCYB contacted me and wanted to do a piece on it. And they did. And when their piece went up on Facebook, then I started getting personal messages from people on Facebook that, calling me names, saying all these things. They also were just sort of talking about me openly on the news websites, which is, that's what happens. But I received threats. There was a threat that was sent to me through email that was more kind of a veiled threat. There was also one when WJHL ran their piece on it. Before they had ever even seen me, this was just a reporter standing in front of the courthouse and talking about the relocation idea. Someone had logged on and said that I needed to be relocated below the ground. So you can definitely say I have received pushback. And the meeting is tomorrow evening. I've been told that there will be security there. The police department is involved with this. The sheriff's department is involved with this. And there was a second petition that went out when all of this was making the news a couple weeks ago. Somebody started a second petition to leave them where they are, but nobody took ownership of it. It was created by some anonymous person. And I just went to look for that petition again because I'm kind of putting together all of my thoughts for tomorrow evening. That petition is now gone. So it has disappeared. I don't know if the person who created it decided to take it down or what happened with that, but it's no longer there. And it did have like 3,000 names.
Well, I feel bad that you've had to endure all this. You know, people come out.
I knew though, I mean, the thing is, I knew when this started, when I put up the petition, that there would be people who thought it should remain. But I think that we have to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Like, this is important and it is the right time to do this. And we may come to that table, we may talk, and they may decide off the bat that they don't want to relocate it right now. But no one has done anything about this yet.
Yeah.
So by having this conversation, we move the needle a little bit, no matter what.
And you move it from an intellectual standpoint, which is really important. I mean, emotion's emotion, but,
Right.
but you know, the rational discussion's what I tend to believe makes a big difference. Heather, before we continue on, let me go ahead and cut this into our first segment because I'm not sure how long these segments can be, and we'll come right back for segment number 2. So